Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated.
It was what George Bush had been eager to tell the world for 7 months. On the evening of the 1st of August, the National Security Advisor, Brent Scowcroft, tells the president that the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait was underway. The president spoke to the nation the next morning.
We call for the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of all the Iraqi forces. There is no place for this sort of naked aggression in today's world.
The president moved quickly, decisively, and globally. He froze all Kuwaiti and Iraqi assets under U.S. control. He enlisted the United Nations Security Council. It was in the UN's name that Saddam Hussein was ordered to get out of Kuwait. The president, as he so often does, began to work the phones, calling the Saudis, the Egyptians, the European allies, Japan, and the Soviet Union. The president very carefully, characteristically, creating consensus.
I want to see the rest of the world join us, as they are in overwhelming numbers, to isolate Saddam Hussein.
Very quickly and in a very public way, Mr. Bush made his intentions clear. He sent the Secretary of Defense to Saudi Arabia and Egypt, seeking support for a major American military presence in the region. On August the 8th, in the Oval Office, Mr. Bush announced that American soldiers were on their way to Saudi Arabia.
America does not seek conflict, nor do we seek to chart the destiny of other nations. But America will stand by her friends.
As the American troop buildup continues, the president mounts an intensive campaign to make the anti-Iraq coalition truly global. By the fall, 27 other nations are sending troops, material, or money. In order to keep his Arab partners in the fold and mobilize support at home, George Bush commences a public relations blitz, which very quickly personalizes the conflict. George Bush versus Saddam Hussein. The president equates Hussein with Adolf Hitler. Speaking to the troops in Saudi Arabia on Thanksgiving.
What we're confronting is a classic bully who thinks he can get away with kicking sand in the face of the world.
The president holds all the reins very carefully. On November the 29th, the United Nations, where George Bush cut his diplomatic teeth in the 1970s, authorizes the president to use force if Saddam Hussein has not left Kuwait by the 15th of January. The president was determined not to make an enemy of Congress, even though some Democrats would ultimately vote against the use of force. He kept the congressional leadership in touch and ultimately had his way. On January the 16th, at the dinner hour, the most violent air attack began against Iraq and occupied Kuwait.
This conflict started August 2nd, when the dictator of Iraq invaded a small and helpless neighbor.
And then the president waited for 5 weeks of devastating bombing.
We'll give Saddam Hussein until noon Saturday to do what he must do. Begin his immediate and unconditional withdrawal from Kuwait.
The ground war began on George Bush's schedule. It lasted 100 hours, and it was George Bush who decided when enough was enough.
Well, you know, to be very honest with you, I haven't yet felt this wonderfully euphoric feeling that many of the American people feel. I think I'm beginning to feel that the joy that Americans all feel now is proper. It has to do with a new, wonderful sense of patriotism that stems from pride in the men and women that went over there. I just need a little more time to sort out in my mind how I can say to the American people, it's over, finally. Last T is crossed, last I is dotted.
And so we choose George Bush. As the president said, the real credit for winning the war, one which so many Americans believe was a just one, belongs with the troops. Still, the president's leadership has impressed all but his toughest critics, who now would urge him to go on to education and aids, the economy, and to an energy policy with precisely the same vigor and determination that he gave to the war. That is our report on World News Tonight. ABC News will keep you up to date on the Gulf tonight on 2020 and on Nightline with Ted Koppel. One piece of news, the meeting between the military commanders scheduled to be held tomorrow has now been delayed until Sunday. I'm Peter Jennings. Have a good weekend. Good night.